Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Beth Pensabene, and I have Heather Baker-Carr from Beachway here with us today. She has been an executive director with us for over a year and a half, and she's here really to talk about mental health and how that applies to your life, what to look for, individual assessments, as well as how we can really help our loved one and focus on the solution. So, Heather, thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you, Beth.
So, you and I were chatting a little bit about COVID and the COVID timeline.
Mhm.
And I found it really interesting that in June of 2020, 40% of US adults were struggling with mental health.
Mhm.
I find that, shocking, but not shocking, right? Because it was such a life shift to go from being with people, being able to be with your loved ones and your families, and then feeling very isolated. And
Mhm.
it has actually gone on a lot longer than any of us could anticipated. And because of that, it's really starting to kind of come to light, the mental issues that people are having,
Mhm.
struggling with COVID and this isolation. Can you kind of address that a little bit for everyone listening today?
Absolutely. We're seeing an escalation in people having levels of decompensation in terms of their mental health. So I want to back up a little bit and just talk about what mental health actually is. Mental health encompasses our psychological, our emotional, and our social well being. So if you just imagine that topic on a very broad spectrum, you're going to see that COVID has inherently caused us to disconnect from our community and our social connections, which maybe we previously had. So I think as human beings, we're meant to live in community. We're meant to be in connection with others. And so COVID has exacerbated what are some underlying mental health issues for people. People who struggled with depression throughout their lifetimes are now isolating more than they ever have in the past. So some of the outlets maybe that they would have utilized, connecting with others, meeting with friends or family, that's all been disrupted. We're also seeing really heightened levels of anxiety, mostly because imagine that your fear of getting COVID and going out into a social situation might not only impact you and your medical issues, but it could impact someone that you love. So there's a lot of fear, doubt, insecurity, and anxiety. I know even in my own family system, we're not connecting in person. We're not looking at people in the eye, and we're not making the same connections that we used to. So I think that we're seeing a heightened escalation of what we would call a mental health problem um, because of COVID in the last year. Definitely more than it ever has been.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see because even something like this, we're doing a Zoom right now. I'm so
Hmm.
grateful that I can see you eye to
Hmm.
eye. I know that has been a saving grace for a lot of people is just being able to do FaceTime and Zoom, but there's a lot of people that haven't been doing that, haven't been
Sure.
able to connect. And even it's not really the same, right? Because even though I can see you, it's not the same as being able to hug you and really
Right.
see you in person.
Certainly.
So we were talking a little bit about the individual assessment of each person
Hmm.
and how it really shows up when they're struggling with their mental health. Can you give us some examples for that?
Sure. So one of the first things that would happen when someone came to a place like Beachway Therapy Center is that we would want to do a full assessment of exactly what's going on. We would look for signs and symptoms that are really impacting the person. Sadness, loneliness, patterns of behavior maybe that were outside of the norm. One thing that I like to do as a therapist is I like to talk to my patients a lot about this continuum of mental health. On a scale of 0 to 10, experiencing depression or sadness at a 3 might be something that we can handle. But once we get to about a 7 or something that is higher than that, now we are outside of our comfort zone and we're going to begin to experience signs and symptoms that are no longer adaptive to good functioning. So, in terms of mental health, what we know as clinicians is that you can truly diagnose a mental health issue when it crosses 3 areas in your life, right? So, if I look at maybe a successful career woman who's been married for a long period of time and has a family and many friends and peer relationships on the outside, if her mental health issues are struggling to the point where she no longer wants to go to work, no longer is performing at the same level that she used to, maybe challenges in the marriage are starting to break down, no longer having that desire to engage with family or children or connect with peers on a social level. Now I know it's crossed three areas of that person's life. And so that at that point, we know that somebody would need a little bit more help. At that point, we know that it's actually a diagnosable issue in terms of mental health. Does that help?
That really does, because I
Okay.
think sometimes people think that it may be, something where you have extreme
Hmm.
depression or extreme anxiety or maybe extreme PTSD. But the
Hmm.
way that you kind of explain it, it really is something that could be affecting you. And you might be just sweeping it under the rug, thinking, I'm fine, I'm
Hmm.
fine, I'm fine. What happens to somebody if they don't see these warning signs and don't reach out for help?
Sure. So I think one thing that's really important is just to normalize a certain level of mental health. I think all of us are going to experience a level of depression, anxiety, sadness, loneliness throughout our lifetime. Research has shown us about 50% of people in their lifetime are at one point or another going to be able to be diagnosed with some type of mental health issue. And I know that's a really, really shocking number, right? So if we look at somebody maybe who is having a situational issue and they don't have it addressed, meaning that on that scale of 0 to 10, they're living above a 7 for a little bit too long. And I like to put a timeline on that, anything longer than about 3 to 5 days, right? That's painful for a person and it's going to start to get exacerbated. And then as human beings, we innately don't want to feel intense emotions. So we begin to act in certain ways to respond to the mental health issue. So I'm going to give a very specific example. Imagining that somebody's experiencing some situational depression. Maybe we'll use the example of COVID. Because of COVID, they've lost their job. Now they're isolating in their home a little bit more. They're finding that they're staying in bed more often, eating their feelings. They stopped answering the phone. If that period of time starts to last for a little bit more, than 5 days to a week, they're going to start to utilize those negative or maladaptive coping behaviors and they're going to get exacerbated. They're going to continue and they're going to grow. And then people all of a sudden get to a point where it starts to feel very dark and bleak, right? So what we want is we want to normalize a certain amount of discomfort in our lives. But there has to be a point where every individual or family member looks at someone and says, this is just a little too much, right? I've been sitting on this for a little bit too long, and it's no longer something that I can handle on my own. So that's pretty often what we see.
So, what should somebody do if they either can acknowledge that themselves, that look, it's
Mhm,
been over a week, I haven't got out of bed,
mhm,
I don't feel like myself, or if it's a loved one seeing that, you
mhm.
know, what steps should they take?
Sure. So there's some basic self-care things that people can do on their own, right? Before maybe they were able asking for a little bit more help. So a few things that could happen would be doing things like yoga, practicing meditation, taking healthy walks, spending time outside. I'm a big proponent of people being outside in the sunshine and getting a little bit of vitamin D, especially if they're feeling off balance. Exercise, putting balance back into your eating habits, trying to create a structured schedule. So those are all things that people should try on their own. Um, and then there are situations where that just doesn't work, right? So somebody may have tried all of those things. Maybe as a family member, you recognize that your loved one, your husband is really struggling, calling out sick more often from work, eating a little bit more, not wanting to play around the house, not wanting to go and do outside activities or anything along those lines. I think it's important for family members to be able to have that honest conversation with another person and say, hey, listen, I think you're really struggling and this has been lasting for a little bit too long. Maybe we should try to do this together. That's one thing that I would always invite family members to do. Why don't we take a walk around the block? Why don't we try to do something a little bit different? And these are all things that the individual and the family system can do on their own, which is really empowering. And I think that that's a great coping skill. But I do agree at the end of the day that sometimes those things are not going to work, right? We all have to acknowledge and admit that every now and then somebody may try all those things on their own and they're just not effective. And then we have to take it to the next level, which is where someone like me or another clinician kind of sort of gets involved and begins to explore and figure out exactly what's going on behind the scenes and see if there's other ways that we might be able to help.
I love that you create such a level of hope, Heather, I think that's just so wonderful because
Mhm.
there are people listening who think they're pretty hopeless. They're thinking that either themselves or their loved ones aren't going to be able to get out of this situation.
Mhm.
And I love that the thought of doing it together. I mean, if
Mhm.
it's not your spouse,
Mhm.
maybe it's your child, or maybe it's your best friend, or maybe it's your sister,
Right.
maybe it's your brother,
Right.
but doing something together, I think is so powerful.
Mhm.
And, having that hope that a walk around the block can make you feel better. It
Sure.
really can. I mean, I've,
Mhm.
I've, I've had a situation where my kids were really little, four of them
Mhm.
under 5. And the
Mhm.
walk around the block did save me a few times. So I can
I'm
relate to
certain.
that.
I'm certain.
I
And
can,
I think it's also really important to recognize that with any underlying mental health issue, it doesn't just affect one person, it has a domino effect. It affects the immediate family system that is around the person, and then the extended family system, and then the local social environment and the community that actually supports that person, right? We are connected to something that is greater than ourselves, right? We're supposed to have meaning and purpose. So when one person is not okay, it's not just that person's issue to solve. It's the entire systems to help and support and try to move them forward. We're just a part of that dynamic, right? Uncovering it all and figuring out how to help and support people.
I love that. And if all the things that you mentioned don't help and you do need more
Mhm.
help, it's there, right?
Mhm.
It's there. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that we should keep quiet. It's something
Mhm.
that we really need to realize that there's people out there like yourself who
Mhm.
are trained to help people who need it, who need more than a walk around the block. And I think it's really
Right.
important to share that because some people think, I'm not sick and
Mhm.
I didn't break my leg or I don't,
Right.
have migraines. But it's something that I can't get out of bed and nothing seems to help. Well, there is help for that. So
Mhm.
knowing that that's out there does give you even an additional hope. I think that's really smart.
Well, I
Um,
think society is helping us a lot too right now. I'm not going to lie. I think that there are a lot of famous people, athletes, movie stars, politicians that are coming out from the shadows and saying, I've struggled in my lifetime, whether it be situational or something that's a little bit more long term. And we have to break that stigma. If we go back to the data that I shared with you, at one point or another in someone's life, about 50% of the population will experience some level of mental health issue. About 1 in 5 Americans will experience something that might be a little bit more serious. And it could have been triggered by an event or a moment in time, right? So somebody experiences a significant grief or loss in their family, the death of a loved one. Again, a situational problem, but something that could last for the remainder of their life and maybe trigger some underlying core belief systems that now as an adult we're looking at it from a very different perspective and the person just can't come out of it, right? So we all need to talk about it a lot more and break that stigma, because these are our sisters, our moms, our grandmothers, our husbands, our brothers. These are the people that we know, our neighbors and our friends. They have struggled, and I find it fascinating sometimes. I've been a therapist for a really long time, and I have friends that are in my life for over 20 years, and I might sit down and have a conversation with them, and all of a sudden I find out that they have struggled, and they never said anything, and I never even knew. And this is what I do. You know what I mean? So we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it. We need to validate people when they're going through something, and we need to be understanding. We need to listen, be more aware, right? And one thing that I always recommend to family members, if you see something, say something. Don't just pretend that things are not happening. It's okay to go to your loved one and say, something's just a little bit off. Do you want to talk about it? We forget to do that, right?
I think just even
Mhm.
sharing it today, Heather, is so important because people are going to watch this back and
Mhm.
it's just going to continue to share that we do need to talk about it more. We do need to make sure our loved ones know. And it's okay to just ask somebody how are you doing today? You doing okay?
Exactly.
I always
Exactly.
appreciate that because sometimes I need to say, you know what, I'm not doing too great. Let me tell you
Right.
why. And you feel so much better once you get that off your chest. So,
Absolutely.
Heather, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are. This was so
Sure.
helpful for the community, for
Mhm.
the alumni that watch this, for anybody that we're connected to see this, and anybody who's not connected to Beachway.
Mhm.
this is just a great example of something that we do, and the real care that goes into
Mhm.
our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Beth.